thank you so much for joining us for this special discussion. My name is Casey Frazier, and I'm honored to be our host today. I am joined by some outstanding leaders representing 3 different organizations who share a significant commitment in common: the safety and security of the children in our churches and ministries. I can't wait for you to hear from each of them. And today, our conversation is admittedly heavy. We would love for all of this content to be completely unnecessary, but unfortunately, that simply isn't the case. So rather than avoiding the topic or thinking that will never happen in our church, we want to lean headfirst into the tough conversation in order to learn and ultimately be encouraged so we can have healthy and safe ministries. The church serves an ever-increasing number of trauma-exposed children who struggle spiritually, socially, and emotionally. We can reach these hurting kids by providing an environment where they are safe, loved, and valued. We live in a broken world, and the church is not immune to the dangers of predatory behavior or abuse. So it's critical that congregations invest effort and attention into preventing exploitative relationships and subsequent child abuse. And this creates a challenging tension between the trauma-informed ministry goal of fostering supportive relationships and the safety goal of identifying and preventing dangerous relationships that only appear to be supportive. So the purpose of our conversation today is to speak into that tension and address 2 key questions. First, how can ministry leaders and team members distinguish between supportive, trauma-informed strategies and grooming behaviors which may appear similar on the surface? And secondly, how can a ministry promote and engender authentic, caring relationships between children and adults while guarding the emotional and physical safety of the children in its care? With that, I would like to pause and introduce our guest panel today. First, from Reach Hurting Kids Institute, Executive Director Dr. Robert Crosby and Associate Director Reverend Kayla Smith. From the Evangelical Council for Abuse Prevention, or ECAP, Executive Director Jeff Dalrymple. And from Protect My Ministry, Vice President Ryan Carter. So those are just your names and titles, but I would really love for you to each share who you are and a little bit more about your organizations and what brought you here today. So let's start with you.
Well, thanks a lot. I'm Dr. Robert Crosby, and I'm the Executive Director of Reach Hurting Kids Institute. So I am a research psychologist, and over the past 10 years, I've been researching children's ministry through a scientific behavioral science lens. And recently, that research is focused on helping churches minister more effectively to kids who've experienced trauma. And out of that research program came the Reach Hurting Kids Institute. So we're an ecumenical team of researchers, pastors, mental health professionals, and our mission is to empower the church to reach hurting kids.
And I'm Pastor Kayla Smith. I am the pastor of intergenerational discipleship at Trevecca Community Church of the Nazarene, and I am the associate director of Reach Hurting Kids Institute.
Jeff Dalrymple, Executive Director of Evangelical Council for Abuse Prevention, Hereforth, ECAP. We're a national association of Christian ministries that work to keep kids safe, to create safe environments where kids can hear the gospel and grow in discipleship. We do that primarily through our child safety standards and accreditation program.
Ryan Carter, Protect My Ministry. I've been with Protect My Ministry for 17 years now, and we're the largest background check provider for churches in the United States. We've got a little over 30,000 churches across all 50 states and have grown from a handful of employees to now several hundred that reach out and help churches implement good child safety training procedures. We work with ECAP, and we partner with organizations to help develop great background screening is our main thing, but also the rest of the child safety training things that are so important to what we do.
Well, thank you all for being here and willing to bring your expertise into this conversation. When I first met the team from Reach Hurting Kids and they explained distinguishing between authentic and counterfeit relationships, it reminded me of an experience as a bank teller in college. That was my little part-time job. I remember saying, this probably sounds silly, and I'm sure it was, but when we went through training about how to spot fake money, There were typical signs to help you identify the fake, the color, the feel of the paper, or the signs and the symbols to make it difficult to replicate or reproduce. But when in doubt, or for those larger bills, we had a pin. We could draw a quick line across a $100 bill, and if it was not authentic, the marker would leave this really dark streak. So I think I said to Dr. Robert, this reminds me of that. Replicas and duplicates are counterfeits, and they're hard to spot with an untrained eye. So the bank gave us a literal tool. And I really think you made me feel good. I don't know if you were just being kind, but I think you said that's not a bad example. It's kind of accurate. So deep, authentic relationships are the key to both discipleship and creating a safe, trauma-informed space for hurting children. But some people create counterfeit relationships for the purpose of exploiting children. So at first glance, it might be difficult to tell the difference between a counterfeit and the real thing. So given the danger of accepting a counterfeit relationship, some churches or ministries may react by preventing any kind of intimate relationship from forming between children and adults. But this reaction, just like a bank refusing to accept any kind of money for fear of accepting counterfeit currency, of course, a bank needs to protect themselves from exploitation. But if they stop serving their essential function, they basically can no longer function as a bank at all. In the same way, when a ministry refuses to accept meaningful relationships, it also ceases to serve its essential function. It's no longer a ministry. It's now a childcare service. Authentic relationship is the difference between discipleship and daycare. Therefore, just as banks provide their tellers with tools for detecting counterfeit money, the purpose of this discussion is to provide ministries with tools for detecting counterfeit relationships. And this is where we will be spending our time today, providing specificity around this complexity. We'll be watching and discussing 3 scenarios and comparing these behaviors. So, Dr. Crosby, before we watch these vignettes, this is a reflection of your real research, right? So tell us a little bit more about what we're going to see and what we might need to know before.
Well, thank you. So before we jump in, I think it's helpful to even say what we mean by trauma-informed ministry. The term trauma-informed has been used a lot lately. There's even some confusion around that, possibly some controversy around that. So here's what we're talking about when we say trauma-informed ministry. We're talking about one that begins by realizing that a shocking number of kids and teens in our churches have experienced traumatic events. They might be going through them now, or will go through a traumatic event or situation by the time they graduate from the youth group. And this trauma negatively affects the way they relate to the church and the way that they relate to God. And so a trauma-informed ministry seeks to create a supportive, safe space where those kids can heal and succeed at church. So simply put, trauma-informed children's ministry means tearing down the barriers that prevent hurting kids from coming to Jesus. This sounds like a nice idea, but it's difficult to do because the behaviors and the emotions that are presented from a child from trauma can be very confusing and very difficult to handle. So the focus of the research was, what are best practices? What are churches doing well that helps a child who normally feels on the outside feel like they're on the inside? And so we collected examples from churches all over the country who are able to do this well. And so we're going to see vignettes that come out of those examples.
And I believe our first story is about Emily, but that's not her real name, is it?
No, of course not. We've changed all the names and any identifying markers of the churches, the children, and any adults involved just to protect their safety, of course.
So before we see Emily, is there anything about her story that we might need to know?
So with Emily, you're going to see a really common situation in the church. You're going to see a girl really needing some attention. And that can be a tricky place for us, right, as we're looking to the safety of the children in our ministry. So let's watch and see how this leader interacts with Emily in her moment of need.
8-year-old Emily's parents have finally separated after a long season of fighting. Rachel, the 3rd grade girl's small group leader, makes an intentional effort to strengthen her relationship with Emily. Over the next several weeks, Rachel finds opportunities to talk to Emily one-on-one, offering her a chance to express how angry she is at her parents for the divorce, how she feels like her mom doesn't love her, and how she's afraid she won't see her dad ever again. During these talks, Rachel assures Emily that anything she says will be kept confidential unless there's something that could harm someone. However, she does remind Emily that her parents love her, and she encourages Emily to tell her parents how she is really feeling. Rachel also shares her own story of being a child of divorce, which helps Emily feel that she is not alone and offers her hope of a bright future. As Miss Rachel and the girls in her small group transition to 4th grade and eventually 5th grade, Emily's connection with Miss Rachel grows even stronger. Even after Emily graduates to the youth group, she still seeks Miss Rachel out each week to talk, and Rachel welcomes the opportunity.
Okay, so Dr. Rabbit, I would like to start with you. I've got a number of questions. There's a very intentional relationship that is developed here. Do you think that churches might see this type of relationship as maybe a safety red flag? There's a very intentional connection between this child and the leader.
So what we're seeing here is really the foundation of any trauma-informed strategy. It's been said that relationship is the trauma-informed strategy. And so a child who's going through a hard time, a child who's struggling with trauma, they're going to be especially in need of that kind of relationship. And it's got to be something that's sustained over time. And so in order to be effective, we have to be able to identify kids that are struggling and invest in them, even though that can be tricky because we want to make sure this is a safe relationship, but it's necessary to really have that connection in order to help them feel safe and to help them heal.
So you said the word safe. Is there a safety concern about this close of a relationship? Jeff, I feel like you are ready to say something.
Yeah, let's go. So before Miss Rachel even has access to work with kids in that ministry, we want them to work with Protect My Ministry does a great job at this, screening and training that worker before they have access to kids. That screening is going to include reference checks, a background check, possibly an interview. And then that training is going to include understanding abuse, trauma, definitions of abuse, indicators of abuse, common grooming behaviors, as well as mandatory reporting laws for that state where they're located.
Yeah, and one of the big elements of the training that we do at Protect My Ministry is like you said, Jeff, we want to show what are the common patterns that abusers will take when they are trying to get their way into an organization for not the best reasons, right? And so what that does is it opens up not just the staff members' eyes to, hey, what should I be on the lookout for? But now you've got staff and all other volunteers looking through the same lenses of, hey, what's appropriate, what's not appropriate? And then on top of that, one of the things we encourage is make sure you've got documented policies around, hey, what is acceptable in the ministry and what's not acceptable. And so things like, never being alone with a child, how you handle car rides, how you handle bathrooms, all the scenarios that we know we come across day in and day out, those need to be documented, and you need to have a plan in place for how we protect our kids, how we protect our staff and the ministries that we're involved in. So it's just a holistic thing that we need to make sure we're taking seriously.
So in the vignette, we saw Miss Rachel talk openly about her experience with her own parents' divorce. Kayla, what about oversharing? Is there some risk there?
Yeah, there would always be a risk, right, in that kind of relationship. One thing that we use in one of our trainings in small group leadership is to use the acronym WAIT. We say, why am I talking? What's the point of what I'm saying right now? If there's anything in me, if I'm sharing my experience being a child of divorce with Emily, if there's anything in me that is seeking any kind of emotional input from her, if this has anything to do with my emotional need, I need to stop. If I'm speaking to extend a bridge to her, to say, you're not alone, other people understand, you're not isolated here, that could be a good reason to speak. So we would encourage anyone who works with kids and has these kinds of conversations to wait for a minute, think about what you're saying, and carry that conversation with the delicacy that it deserves, right?
And that just sounds like really good advice for any adult. Like, am I making this about me? Or, yeah, that's really good. What was that acronym again?
That's
really
WAIT.
Good.
Why am I talking?
I love that. I'm curious about the relationship that they had specifically for years and years and years. There was connection to one particular leader. What is the significance of Emily maintaining that relationship And could that be very isolating? So Jeff, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so as much as possible, we want to include other individuals in that interaction. So maybe it's a small group of other students or youth. There could be other workers that could be a part of the interaction. If and when we need to have confidential or sensitive conversations, we can have those private conversations in a public space. For example, you can be in a coffee shop having a private conversation. There's plenty of other eyes and people around in that situation.
So it may not be about the isolation to the specific leader, but even being aware of the environment being isolating. Got it. Are there any other red flags or maybe things that different settings, would some of those conversations be more appropriate in a small group rather than that continued one-on-one relationship?
Well, I defer to that leader, of course, but being aware of what are we talking about? What are our goals? What are the issues? It could even be that there, and Kayla might have some good advice for us on this, but there could be a sensitive conversation that's starting to come up in a small group setting. They say, you know what, let's have more of that conversation, just one-on-one in another setting.
Yeah, we've actually found in our research that a lot of those big disclosures happen in that one-on-one setting. Small group serves a beautiful purpose for kids. We have a whole workshop on training leaders to lead these trauma-informed small groups. But a lot of times a kid needs that one-on-one moment, or we need to redirect them into a one-on-one moment to have that conversation. One of our just rules of thumb is to be within eye shot, out of earshot, right? So that somebody can see you the whole time you're having this conversation, but the child can feel that confidential space where they can speak freely in that.
And to build on that, when we're talking about the sustained one-on-one relationship, we're looking at building and maintaining a healthy attachment. So we're talking about kids that in tough situations, they may not have a healthy attachment in their life at all. When we talk about this, we tend to think about our experience, or the framework is healthy, two-parent families, and the reality is a lot of the kids coming in, they may not have those two-parent families. They may not have anyone that feels safe to them. So when they show up at your church and they get to know you or this particular person over time, and this could take months, if not years, to develop, they begin to finally have a safe person at church. And so I'll go to small group because this person's my leader. I'll go to camp because this person's my cabin leader, sure. Things like that. And so it's necessary and good and valuable to maintain and protect that. But at the same time, as our friend was pointing out, we're expanding that base. Mm-hmm. So we're not isolating them within that relationship. It's yes and. So I'm here for you. I'm not leaving you. I want you to also meet so-and-so. I want you to be part of this group also who can also support you and have your back. So we're growing that foundation, but we're beginning and maintaining that safe attachment base.
And as the volunteer, one of the things that I love about this example is they're actively encouraged to share with their parents. And so say you want to provide that safe space where, hey, this is an area where you can be comfortable. You can be honest with the things that you're dealing with and know that I'm going to have confidentiality unless it's a danger to yourself or others. But I want you to tell your parents they love you. And so that's a really big deal too, that the volunteer, whoever's in this position is being inclusive of, the parents and whatever authority figures that this, the child is going through as well, that they know I'm here for you, but you can tell your parents they love you. And so it's great. You're broadening that exposure to not just yourself, but you're saying, hey, trust your mom, trust your dad, like have those conversations. That's a really great point too.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up. That's kind of the last question. Emily seems pretty angry, but her leader was encouraging her to, hey, talk to your parents about these feelings. So why is that so important? Not just from a safety perspective, but it seems like there's some emotional safety there as well.
Yeah, I think when we get in a position where we are having a conversation with a child or teen or whoever, and there's almost a triangulation against the parent, that is at best really unhealthy, and at worst can be really dangerous. So our job is to foster the good relationships that these children can have, to point them back to their guardians and parents, to say, yeah, I validate all those emotions. You are not inherently wrong for feeling the way that you feel in this moment. I think you should bring this to your parent. I think you can bring this to the person that you're struggling with. We can trust kids, right? We can trust them on a deeper level than we assume. in the navigation of really difficult topics like this. She can do this. And her group leader believes in her that she can do this. And that's making all the difference for Emily.
The communication and the partnership with the parents is really, really important. Two things that I would recommend in communication would be communicating to parents some of the safety measures that the church has in place. They don't need to see all of the policies, but they need to know some of the principles that are in place, giving them confidence. But the second thing is communicating that interaction, that healthy interaction between the leaders, the volunteers, and the parents is really important. So following up with a conversation, offering to talk and partner and to be that bridge with the parents and the kids, I think is really important.
It's really good. It sounds like Emily has a future. That's really encouraging. Well, next up is Ethan. All right, so I want to switch to Ethan. So, Kayla, what do we need to know about Ethan before we watch his story?
Yeah, Ethan's story kind of hits a little close to home for me right now. Our church has made some really intentional efforts in reaching out to our community and a bunch of kids whose families don't join them at church. So as we watch with Ethan, watch for those nuances of their family may or may not be involved. What do we do with kids like that? How do we keep them safe? How do we make them feel safe? So let's take a look.
12-year-old Ethan comes from a tough background. His father died when he was very young, and his mother has been in and out of prison most of his life. Throughout these struggles, Pastor Tracy has grown close to the family. She provides mentoring and support to Ethan's mother and even helps meet Ethan's physical needs, such as taking him back to school shopping each fall. Every year, Pastor Tracy takes her graduating 6th graders on a special out-of-state trip. However, before they can attend, each child must complete a long list of readings, memorization, and catechism. When Ethan finds out about the requirements for the trip, he gets nervous. He's behind in school and does not have the support at home to catch up. There's no way he can complete all that work. However, Pastor Tracy offers to personally tutor Ethan to help him accomplish all the requirements for the trip. Every week, she and Ethan arrive early to church so that she can help him through the list. When Ethan's mom has to work Sundays, Pastor Tracy picks him up herself and brings him to church. Finally, after weeks of hard work, Ethan earns the opportunity to be part of the 6th grade adventure.
Okay, so Ethan is getting quite a bit of special attention. That's one of the things that I took away from this. Is that fair? Is it appropriate? Is this a risk? Dr. Robert, I'd love to start with you on that specialized relationship and maybe what's at danger there.
So when we have a kid who's coming out of trauma, they're going to have special needs and they're going to need special attention in order to be included and to be successful. Just as if we had a student who is in a wheelchair, a student who is seeing impaired, we would need to make special accommodations to include them, and we need to think of it through that lens. This child needs special attention in order to be included in the program. And we want to do that as well as we can, as safely as we can, but it gets messy. Because a lot of times the policies we put in place make certain assumptions that may not be met in the situation. And if we aren't able to adapt and be creative and find solutions, the alternative is that this child is simply not part of the church community. And to us, that's an unacceptable outcome.
Kind of want to talk about the car situation. So I love that there's an opportunity to make sure that he can come, but I didn't see anybody else in that car. Mm-hmm. So can we talk about the transportation, meeting a literal physical need, but what is at risk here? Go for it, Jeff.
Yeah, well, so first of all, this is the church being the church, and praise God, we need more of that, right? But yeah, I think the car ride situation is problematic. I would hope that there could be some other creative solution. Maybe there's another family, maybe there's another student, maybe Pastor Tracy has one of their own kids that they can include in that car ride so that they're not alone in the car together.
Ryan, what about policies and procedures here? Like, what opportunity is there for some compliance?
Yeah, I think first off, I want to say we need more Tracys. So Pastor Tracy's
she's
great.
Great. Like,
she's a hero in the story. We'll tweak a couple of minor little things, right? But I think the again, it goes back to having a documented policy, and like you said, the being alone with a child in a car in almost any environment, I would say, is a yellow flag at best. Try to avoid it, and it's almost not negotiable, just because it's like, hey man, if there's going to be accusations, or there's going to be risk, or there's going to be even appearance of evil, that's where you're going to have a difficult time arguing, because there's nobody else with you. And so I think we would talk about how you want to be the church there and say, like, this is how we as a church and we as a ministry are going to reach out and love you, and we need more people to help. And even if Tracy's the point person, she's kind of coordinating some of these special efforts and these special needs. That's not a bad thing, but we need others to be involved to help her and to also help the student know that. And that does a lot, I think, because it broadens their horizons to say, man, I've got this great connection with this leader who cares about me, and they're bringing in other people who also love me. Like it creates an even healthier, more dynamic experience for the student.
It does seem like Tracy took this upon herself rather than she was the facilitator of a church program. Am I kind of reading that wrong?
Yeah, well, and the church should honestly have guidance and policies related to both messaging and transporting kids to and from church programs. Again, if we have to be in that situation, some communication with parents is a really great way to address that. So a text to mom, hey, I'm picking up Ethan here and we're going to church and he'll be back at this time. Some of that communication by text message is just another safeguard you can put into place.
I think this is a place where paying attention to it not being intentional could be important for us to see the nuance of what if Pastor Tracy usually brings her child, but her child's sick today. So are we just not going to bring Ethan to church? Does Ethan not get to come to church because at the last minute there was a change? I had a circumstance of bringing a child home from church camp. He was sick. His mom could not come to pick him up. I was coming back to our town that night, and she asked me if I could drive him. So I think the question is more like, what do we do in a situation where we can't avoid it without excluding the child for no reason of their own? They didn't do anything. They should be included. Is that a case where we just say, well, I guess Ethan doesn't come to church? Or are there ways, I think I noticed in ECAP's code of conduct, right? Is there a way to say, I have the parent's permission to do this? I think it was called like clear and unequivocal communication from the parent that this is okay. So what do we do if Pastor Tracy usually wouldn't be alone, but this is the circumstance where she is?
I think letting them know the situation, the circumstances around it, and getting their express permission verbally through a text message, through some other sort of communication. There's great technology now where you can even share your location, right? And so as you're moving from point A to point B, you can share your location for that period of time. And that's just yet another safeguard, both for the child in this situation as well as the worker.
I appreciate that all of your organizations kind of take the approach of doing nothing at all out of fear is the worst thing we can do, but it's what can we do to take care of this child, but also remain safe? So I'm curious a little bit about this back to school shopping. Again, I love it. We need more Tracys. That's wonderful. But what about creating a sense of indebtedness? Again, right to Tracy specifically. Can somebody speak into that?
Yeah, I was going to say that the buying gifts can be a grooming behavior. And I don't think that's happening here just based on the tenure. We've got years and years of relationship here. But gifts in and of themselves can be tied, if it's from an individual to someone, that can lead to unhealthy things. And so I think an easy way to say that, hey, from the church, this is from us, this is from the church. And so that can be like, hey, maybe I'm going to take you, but the church is doing this. And so that can take the form of Tracy with other people. That can take the form of, we're going to give from the church. And so maybe the church buys the clothes and then they give it to him the next time he comes to church. There are ways to accomplish, I think, the same outcome, and to do it maybe just a little bit more intentionally so that it's seen by the child as the church is blessing me, and maybe it's not just, Pastor Tracy.
And I think that's really important. Like, you're meeting a physical need. So you guys do this every day. It is so obvious to you why that should come through the church, but communicating that to your volunteers, coming a little bit more ignorantly, hey, he needs something, let me just go do that, unless my church explains why that could be a negative behavior, it may not even occur to me. So again, having those policies in place for the volunteers and helping them understand why that policy matters, I think is also something important that you bring up.
Two other considerations would be a reasonableness of that gift and appropriateness of that gift.
Sure. Sounds like corporate gift policies too. So this is really helpful information, not just for children's ministry.
I've seen, go ahead.
I was going to say, he doesn't need a new laptop every fall.
Xbox
I
5.
do.
I've seen this also used as a way to edify the parent. So we had a parent who didn't have money to buy Christmas gifts for her children. And so the church gave her a gift card to Target, I think it was, so she could go buy the gifts herself for the children and give them to the children from her. So she's being blessed by the church, her kids are being blessed by her, and at no point do the kids feel any sense of obligation or indebtedness, potential manipulation from any individual within the church.
That's great. And also, I love that, edifying the parent as well, who wasn't in the position to do what someone else might have. That's great. Any other thoughts about Ethan and Tracy?
I'll say just one other thing. I think it's important to know, like, while we have these policies around gifts, around car rides, I think we need to make sure that we're honest about how life works, and that sometimes things happen and things come up, and there are special circumstances that we don't foresee, like you were explaining with the sickness. And so it's like, it's important that we have standards and rules and all those things to protect ourselves, but also a healthy understanding it. Sometimes there are exceptions to the rules, and we have grace for that, and we default to grace and love. That should always be the default, and we'll come back and we'll address the policy later. Hey, was policy not fully adhered to? Okay, let's live and learn. And is there something that we can do to better improve that or be prepared for it? Sometimes maybe, sometimes absolutely not. Does that mean we don't do it? No.
I really appreciate hearing you say that. I think there's a pendulum swing that happens, right? That churches are so focused on, how do I hold my safety standards above reproach? Absolutely, we need to do that. But the pendulum swing says, now we're in a place where we're going to deny a child the chance to be at church, or we're not going to give a kid a ride home who needs a ride home. We need to be careful to default to grace. I love the way you said that.
Yeah, and just to make sure that you're thinking creatively, that was not intended to sound like but just, I think there's a lot more creativity at working through some of these for the best interest of both. One other comment about going out of state. So I'm assuming that Pastor Tracy knows, the prevention and response laws, mandatory reporter laws for the state where this church is located. But now I'm going to another state, and if we're taking kids on a church activity out of one state into another, we need to be aware of that other state's laws related to prevention and response. For example, some more and more states, because of the problem of sexual abuse, are implementing more and more laws related to prevention requirements for child and youth serving organizations that may require churches to be compliant. California, Illinois, Indiana, Pennsylvania are some of those states. And so being aware of those laws as you go state to state is really important.
Well, let's move on to Thomas. Is there anything we need to know about Thomas's story?
Yeah, so Thomas obviously has a close relationship with his leader. And this is where we can pay attention to some of the physical safety aspects of keeping our children safe and loved within the church. So watch as Thomas's small group leader interacts with Thomas and his family, and we'll see what we can find for tension points there.
10-year-old Thomas has struggled with depression and low self-esteem ever since his parents' divorce. Because his dad is no longer in the picture, Thomas has sought extra attention from Mr. James, his Sunday school teacher. Their personalities click, and they soon get into the habit of sitting down and talking to each other every week before the lesson. Because of his relationship with Mr. James, Thomas loves coming to church. As soon as he arrives, he always runs straight to Mr. James and gives him a hug. One Sunday, Thomas tells Mr. James that he's going to be in the school play, and he invites him to the performance. Mr. James says that he wouldn't miss it for the world and immediately puts the date in his calendar. On the night of Thomas's performance, Mr. James arrives at the school early so he can get a front row seat. He cheers for Thomas throughout the performance. Afterwards, he gives Thomas a big hug and a congratulations card with a $10 gift card for ice cream. Mr. James asks permission to take a selfie of himself and Thomas in costume, which Thomas happily agrees to. As Thomas's family is leaving to go out to dinner, Thomas begs his mom to invite Mr. James to come along. Mr. James accepts the invitation and spends the evening celebrating Thomas's accomplishment.
Well, it seems like Thomas and Mr. James really do have a very special relationship. I'm curious what would have happened if Thomas had not reached out to that specific leader, and maybe if Mr. James could or should have handled the situation any differently.
Yeah, I think we need to remember that discipleship is inherently relational, but it is never meant to be possessive. So if this child develops close relationships with other leaders, with other students, if they notice that he's off sitting quietly by himself but happy about it, that's good. That's a win. That's not meant to be something that we look at and feel disappointed or angry or lonely about. That would be the red flag, right? If my emotions as a leader are so tied into this child's attention, that's codependency. That's not discipleship. But when we see a leader pointing a child to the whole body of the church, something we've talked about already, I think we see that the church is being the church in those places. There's no possession here. There's no you're mine here and I miss you here. It's celebration of the good work of the church.
I couldn't help but notice a lot of physical touch going on in this story. Not that that's necessarily a bad thing, but I want to have that conversation if we can. Thomas really responds to being hugged. And again, there's this very specific leader. So are there concerns about the physical touch aspect of Thomas's story?
I think it's this is another one of those areas that can be gray and can be, we as a church, we as a ministry organization default to safety over grace. We default to precaution over the horror stories that we see on the news, right? And so I think that we're influenced often by the worst case scenarios. And so when we create the policies, I think we need to make sure that we have clear and concise language of what's acceptable and what's not acceptable. Obviously, anything bathing suit area, no touch, like that's a very easy one to put into place. But there are going to be times and instances where there is appropriate physical touch that can happen between a leader and a student. So like I've been involved in ministry at my church for 10 plus years. I've seen kids literally get born and now they're 7, 8, 9, 10 years old. They run up to me, they hug me, they want to wrestle, they want to fight. I want to body slam them. We all have a great time. And so like, where do I draw the line? And some of that comes through years and years of relationships built. I think one thing that you would want to kind of an easy one to put in place is a time limit around, either before you're allowed to volunteer or before you want to see, appropriate physical interactions, a 3-month, a 6-month waiting period. I know ECAP has some things in the code of conduct around, hey, we just want to live life with you. We want to see you be involved in other ways for a couple of months before, you in the kids ministry or before you're in the student ministry or things like that. That has a tendency sometimes to root out people that have bad intentions because they don't necessarily want to wait for 3-6 months before being in those environments.
Yeah, I think a really important word we need to use here that we're not often comfortable using around children is the word consent. We need to just ask. We need to ask clearly and often. I would say every time there's a physical contact, we can ask, is this something you want? So I have a lot of kids who like to sit with me and my family at church. We call them sanctuary buddies because they don't have a grown-up that they can sit with in the sanctuary. So I've got a row full of kids. I've got one very dysregulated on one side of me. I have my own son on my lap. I have another student very dysregulated on the other side. And all I need to do, and I just did this on Sunday, would you like for my arm to be around you? You seem to need to settle. Would you like for me to put my arm around you? And he says, yes. Would you like for me to put my arm around you? You seem unsettled. No, but can I hold your hand? Yes. Because consent is not just about, I don't like that anymore. So like, if you had a kid that used to wrestle with you and is suddenly uncomfortable, they need the opportunity to say, that's not for me anymore, without it feeling like they've broken the relationship. So consent's not just about, I don't want that anymore, but about, I need something and I can ask for what my body is needing. I need an arm around me. I need you to hold my hand. I need a hug. I don't ever need a fist bump because that feels like you're going to hit me. We need to be aware of how physical contact comes across to our kids and be willing to be the one that's uncomfortable instead of them. We can be uncomfortable by asking the question in order that their comfort is preserved.
The consent that we notice in the story was Mr. James asking for permission to take that picture. And a lot of churches should even consider having policies about taking pictures and any pictures used on social media, especially with minors involved. And that can be very, very sensitive for some parents. And so in this story, I thought that was a good example. He asked for permission. And the other observations from the story is that Mr. James was spending time in a public space. You know, he attended the performance, which was a public event with lots of people around. He was with the family, able to build that relationship together as a family when they went out to dinner and celebrated afterwards.
Yeah. That's exactly what I noticed most, is it seemed like there were all these opportunities where those things could be negative, but public setting, parents were involved, a lot of asking of permission. So that seemed very encouraging. But I'm watching this as a newbie. I'm like, is this a trap? Like, what did he do wrong? But it seems like he did a lot of things right in this situation.
Yeah, we like him. He's doing a lot of the things very, very well. And like you said, bringing in spaces where there's more than one person. The other thing that he's driving towards inclusion in group. And so he's not trying to break the child away off. And that's just a key behavior of grooming is you build relationship, and then with the long term or the eventual goal of kind of breaking away from the herd, so to speak. And that we don't see any of that between James and Thomas. He's literally saying, I want to come be a part of what's going on here as the group. And sometimes he's trying to go away and he's being brought back into the group. And so there's a lot of that, which is all very, very positive, very healthy interaction and discipleship.
This is such a really good conversation, kind of some heavy topics, but most of all, this is really encouraging and positive. Here's what we can do, being resourceful. I would like to maybe shift, if we can, a little bit, unless we have any more thoughts on Thomas and Mr. James. I do not want to overstep. We're good on him. We need more Mr. James, is what I heard. More Tracy's, more James. Key takeaways for folks who are listening who are not as researched and experienced in what you guys do or how the lens through which you look through the safety of our children. What would you love for people to really take away? Ministry leaders, church leaders, from this conversation, there is so much research. These were 3 examples of probably 3,000 and different flavors that are similar. How do we not become overwhelmed? My thoughts, we're just having a good conversation. It seems like just having the conversation is a really great place to start within a church setting. So I think we can agree on that. Start talking about it. But what would you leaders love to see church leaders take away from this discussion?
Just to jump on the conversation piece, I think it's so important for us to have these conversations openly at our churches so that leaders, parents, kids, everyone knows that we're talking about what is good relationship, what is true relationship, what is honoring relationship, so that they know that we're thinking about this all the time. We are all the time assessing, is this a counterfeit bill, right? We're asking, could you take a look at this? Does this look right to you? Did I do this right? Did I say this right? Could you have eyes on this situation? Everyone everywhere will know this is a church that means it about reaching the hurting kids in their congregations and communities and keeping them safe.
I think a great way to do that is by putting a simple team together at your church. So a child safety team is something we see pretty frequently. We highly recommend it, and it would include it could include a youth pastor, someone who's leading the younger children. It could include a counselor or a therapist, and even a parent. As radical as that might sound, include a parent into that conversation.
What a crazy idea!
I know, right? And then meet several times a year. It doesn't have to be monthly. That might be too much, unless you're maybe getting started by putting these practices, these safety measures in place. But meet periodically and just ask the question, how are we doing? Is there something we need to rethink? Do we need a new policy? Do we need to adjust something that we're doing? Just that kind of regular check-in is a great place, a rhythm for a church.
We've talked a lot about policy, and again, if you're not informed, that's kind of a scary word. Like, how do I create a policy? What should be included in it? I love that you named who might be on your task force. What about legal counsel and state? I think it's important. State to state has different regulations. So would it be helpful to include someone with some legal experience on your team if you can find one?
Yes, but not necessarily just any attorney. We love our Christian attorneys.
Sure.
But they need to really understand this particular kind of risk management, the laws related to the state where they're located or where you're located as a church, and have some sort of understanding about nonprofit organizations, about church ministries. But there's some fantastic attorneys out there. We work pretty regularly with Christian Legal Society. If you're looking for an attorney, contact us and we'll help make some connections with folks who know what they're talking about on these issues.
Well, the three of your organizations are great places to start for where to find more for anyone who might be wildly overwhelmed. But what I've taken away most is rather than do nothing, starting and doing anything and then seeking out resources like yourselves is a great place to continue and building those policies. You can continue, I love what you said, leading with grace and love, and at the end of everything, the child is most important.
It's important to realize too, like nobody goes into ministry with the idea of I cannot wait to write policies. It's going to be so much fun. It's my favorite. Like people go into ministry because we want to love and we want to minister. We want to reach for the kingdom of Christ, right? And so that's our goal. That's our aim. That's our mission. So use the resources that are available to you. Protect My Ministry, Reach Hurting Kids, ECAP. There are a lot of places where you don't need to be the expert. And there are companies, there are people, there are organizations that exist to help make this easier for you. And so use those things and build those safe environments, and realize too that this is not a one and done, set it and forget it type of thing. So Jeff, just like you said, revisit, retrain, rescreen. So make sure that this is an ongoing discussion that's happening in the leadership in your church, that, hey, we're not going to just take this seriously for a month or a couple of weeks, put all these things in writing and then just be done. Like, no, we need to make sure that we're reevaluating and constantly making sure that what we're doing is best practice.
Well, guys, thank you so much for all of your insight. And most importantly, I want to make sure that each of you can state where we can learn more. So, Ryan, let's start with you. Will you name your website and exactly what resources someone could find there to help them as they go on this journey?
Yeah, absolutely. www.protectmyministry.com. So we've got the background screening resources to get started. We've got child safety training overviews. We have a couple of other products, Safety Rocket, and we partner with a lot of great organizations for things in addition to the background check world. So, with ECAP and Reach Hurting Kids, we also have a great partner, Lead Security, that goes crazy deep dive into all things safety, security, physical safety, child abuse prevention. So we've got a ton of resources where if we don't do it ourselves, we know someone who does and who does it very well. So we'd love to help get people started.
So I think it's very appropriate that you went first, because we have to cover our physical safety bases before we can start talking about emotional safety and creating the conditions for healing. Now, when we're ready for that, move on to that point, I want to direct you to reachhurtingkids.com/safety, where we can continue this conversation. We have a resource called the Reach Hurting Kids Workshop, and this is a self-guided training that ministry leaders can use to teach their volunteers how to minister to kids in a trauma-informed way, and how to do this in a way that's both physically and emotionally safe. We also have a book, Trauma-Informed Children's Ministry, a practical guide to reaching hurting kids, which is available on Amazon. So definitely check that out.
Well, you can find us at ecap.net, and do the /safety as well, specific to this program. ECAP is a national association of Christian ministries dedicated to child and youth protection. We do that through our child safety standards, which are the basis of an accreditation program. The end result of that accreditation which is entirely independent and evidence-based. Our accreditation seal is really symbolic of the safe environment that we want for kids to be able to hear the gospel and learn about Jesus and grow in discipleship, as we've been talking about today. Our accreditation seal provides peace of mind for parents, confidence for leaders, and deterrence for predators.
Well, goodness, Ryan, Dr. Robert, Kayla, Jeff, thank you for being here. Thank you for your years of experience and your commitment, most of all. That's what we said at the very beginning. This discussion was for the commitment of the physical, emotional, and spiritual needs of the children in our churches and ministries. And, You're all doing a wonderful job of supporting that. So thank you for being here, and thank you for watching this resource. Be sure to check out their websites, download all of these amazing tools as we continue to serve our children together.